I'm Nanepashemet, and I'm the manager of the Wampanoag Indian program here at Plimoth Plantation, and also a research associate on native culture in the period of the Pilgrim colony. Uh, Talking about the native peoples in the area, at the time of the Pilgrims, there were a number of different native communities scattered all around the area, but they weren't as numerous, of course, as they had been before European epidemic had come in around 1618. So people like Morton and the Pilgrims did see a number of abandoned places. Morton himself writes about seeing the bones and skulls of the people scattered around the country wherever he traveled, and knowing that there was a much larger population at one time, and the early explorations bear that out. They talk about thousands of Indians where the Pilgrims see few, and it just gives us a perspective that things had very much changed from the way things had been in pre-contact time.
It's, if I remember any of the statistics correctly, it was something like, well, during their first winter, the Pilgrims had lost perhaps half of their people, 1 out of 2. But during this plague that hit the Indian communities earlier, it was something like 8 or 9 out of 10.
Yeah, and some
right?
people say 19 out of 20.
Mm-hmm.
And we don't have a great deal of exact population estimates, because what census is ever accurate even today. But the observations of people that came into eastern Massachusetts, the colonists settled in areas that were fertile and that had been cleared for planting, and many of them had seen signs of native inhabitation around where they had built up these first English towns and plantations. So there was a major depopulation, a major upset that's not only in terms of numbers of people, but also in the psychology of the people. Because it would be like akin to dropping a nuclear weapon on a town and seeing 90% of your people destroyed in a few seconds.
That's exactly what we wanted to maybe try to ask you first. If, and I think they did understand that if the Indians had understood that the plague, whatever it was, smallpox or whatever it was, had come from foreigners, how do you think that would have affected their psychology toward the outsider? Would they normally have been friendly toward people coming here and then maybe change because they were afraid of more disease?
I don't really think they knew where it came from, because had been nothing like it before. They knew nothing of epidemic. Their habits when epidemic struck shows that they didn't know what to do, because it was, they had no word for epidemic in their language. Mm-hmm. And this was an entirely new thing, and even Europeans at the time didn't really know what caused epidemic. So, but they had been more familiar with it because way back in the Middle Ages they had bubonic plague and all these other old world diseases had no counterpart over here. So the effect of a population is thriving, that has tradition, that has specialization, that has governmental structure and kinship-based habits, for all that to be destroyed within the space of, say, a couple of years is going to create a major trauma on the people. And as far as their acceptance of Europeans in the territory, a lot of that was based upon the depopulation that they faced, because people like, say, Massasoit of the Pokanoket, one of the Wampanoag bands, he allied himself with Plymouth Colony, not so much because he was friendly or sympathetic towards them, but because he had a problem. His problem was, because of the depopulation of his people, he was not able to defend his territory against incursions from his enemies, the Narragansetts. Mm-hmm. So he allied himself in a military alliance with the colonists because he knew their weaponry could be useful to help him keep independent of Canonicus, the chief of the Narragansett nation.
Mm-hmm. What was the bone of contention between Narragansetts and Massachusetts tribes territorial, or was it like a running blood feud, or why were they fighting?
We don't really know. The few vague references to it indicate that it had been going on at least the generation previous to those that were in power when the Pilgrims came. And how long before that it was going on, we really don't know. And the causes of it, basically you can say any kind of conflict between populations of human beings is going to be based ultimately on some kind of economic concern. They may color it under like in European times of religious wars and things like that, but basically it's economics.
Sure.
The Crusades, it was an economic thing. The whole thing is economics.
So economics to the Indians would mean what? Control of certain areas to fish or hunt or trade?
Sure, certainly.
Like that?
They would be, organized territorially. So each group did not possess land as if it was a commodity, but land was a territory in which your community had the right to hunt, to fish, to plant, to build their houses, and use all the different resources. The resources themselves were not owned, it was the right to gather them that was owned. And that right could be shared with other people through negotiation. You could include some people in the hunting territory of your people. You could share fishing on a river with other people. And generally that implies that the people are related because they would intermarry, particularly the leadership. They would intermarry their sons and daughters and relatives to each other and create kinship bonds between them.
Yeah.
And kinship was extremely important in native relations. They didn't have that kind of relationship with Europeans, though. Europeans did not intermarry with the natives and create a bond of kinship with each other. Mm-hmm. They operated in a totally different fashion, something that the natives didn't even know what to expect from. It was a totally different alien culture.
What, how would you say that the relations between, say, Massasoit and Plymouth and Chickataba's and Morton's relations are alike or different? Just in the sense that Morton was a man of slightly different behavior than the Plymouth people, would you say?
Certainly, yeah.
Because
Morton
settlement
was
more in Chickataba's territory.
According to Morton's writings, he seems to have been here more for pleasure and some profit than anything else, whereas the people who settled Plymouth, separatists and Anglicans, profit was a major thing to them because they had to finance their colony. They didn't come over here on their own resources. They had to borrow or have people invest in the colony. So relationships with natives was important for their security militarily and also economically. They entered into a formal treaty relationship with Massasoit and with other Wampanoag chiefs, even as far away as Martha's Vineyard and Cape Cod. So that was very important for them to establish good relationships and also provide a model of what they considered to be proper behavior, Christian behavior, and influence the natives with their example, bringing Christianity to this so-called darkened land. Morton wasn't interested in that. Morton, for one thing, was an Anglican, so he had no contention with the king in religious matters. He belonged to the Church of England. He was here basically, he came over as a profiteer, along with other men who had ventured in a colony, and Morton basically got the servants together and overthrew the leadership of the colony by making them equal partners with himself, because some of the others of the colony, notably Captain Wollaston, began to sell the servants into servitude in Virginia. And while he was away, Morton got the rest of them together and said, you're going to be sold as slaves, and so if you join with me, we'll be equal partners, we'll share in the profits, we'll have fun together, etc., etc. So, and his relationship with the natives was one of tolerance. He knew that the native people had certain skills that he could benefit from, and certain commodities that he could get from them that could finance whatever he wanted. But basically his whole game seems to have been for pleasure.
How do you think, how would the Indians then have looked on the two settlements, just in the sense of the fact that one of them has a major stockade and a fort with cannon around it, and the other one doesn't? You know, the difference between Plymouth and Marymount. What does a stockade say to someone on the outside?
Well,
Does it say, I don't trust you?
No, it doesn't. Plymouth did not necessarily put up the stockade as defense against Wampanoag peoples. They put it up in 1622 when they had gotten reports from Virginia of a so-called massacre in 1622, when the Powhatan tribes uprose and in an extremely well-coordinated attack killed several hundred people in a few hours. And when Plymouth heard about this, and it also received threatening messages from Canonicus of the Narragansett because of their alliance with what he considered to be his tribute people, the Paucanockets, Massasoits people, they were interfering in his politics. So he wanted to scare them off. So it was based upon that kind of threat that caused them to be defensive. And also because they knew they were 3,000 miles away from help. And they were also the French up in Canada, they feared. and possibly the Spanish down toward
Yeah,
Florida and the
all of them
Caribbean.
grading up and down the coast, etc., trying to expand into this area.
And they brought over their families.
Yeah.
Whereas Morton was just a bunch of men there, on their own business, doing their own thing. They probably didn't intend to stay. We don't know really what their motives were, but it was a totally different thing for between Plymouth and the people at Marymount.
Mm-hmm.
Now, also, the way that Plymouth dealt politically with Massasoit and his allies was different from the way Morton dealt with Chickatawbut. We don't see any indication that he offered Chickatawbut a military alliance. But we did see where he did trade guns to Chickatawbut's people,
Mm-hmm.
which Plymouth forbade because of the king's ordinance against selling guns to natives or any kind of arms. And Morton basically did that to encourage the natives to hunt for him, so that he could profit in that way
And
get beaver skins for the guns,
Yeah, but-
and beaver skins for the powder and shot that they would need to furnish the guns
Right.
with.
So Morton is trading them a more valuable commodity in order to get them to bring him the pelts,
Yes,
etc. So that he
And
can,
also meat.
he's using the guns as a sort of a unfair advantage over Plymouth, who is trading corn or knives, agricultural tools, things
we
like
really
that.
can't even see that it was an unfair advantage because.
Well, I mean, simply because a gun might be a more coveted item to an Indian who wanted to trade, as opposed to a hoe
Yeah.
or a string of trinkets or something like that, right?
Advantage is merely advantage. You know, he had something that the native people could use,
Mm-hmm.
and he could benefit from their use of it.
Mhm.
So in a sense, he was hiring Indians to hunt for him, so that he
Mhm.
could have nice, meats and things and live well and enjoy himself.
Mhm.
Whereas Plymouth Colony was more worried about their defense. And the other colonists up around Mass Bay that lived in scattered settlements around the bay were worried also because they didn't number as many as the people at Plymouth did. Plymouth was the largest settlement, but it wasn't the only one. There were people at Shawmut, what is now Boston. There were people on Pennock's Island, Thompson's Island, Nanepashemet, where Chelsea is. They were all around.
Piscataqua, all that, places up in New Hampshire area.
Sure.